This is, again, if you've been on one of the webinars in the past, I think I've used this slide since last year, since COVID. My promise in all these webinars is just going to share and teach as much as I can, everything that we've learned over this endeavor for our business, but also specifically in server-side land over the last maybe 6 to 7 months. I'm just going to share everything that we know and just be as transparent, open, and I'm here to answer any questions that you have. So I'm excited. It's been a whirlwind couple of weeks here with all the iOS 14 changes starting to roll out. Just a quick agenda. So number one, just going to do obviously an intro for those that don't know me or Elevar. I think most on here are customers of some point. We really only just promoted this to customers, but I'm sure there might be some others that are on here that don't know who we are. So I'll do a quick rundown there. I'll go through a server-side container setup. So I'm essentially going to simulate going through creating a server-side container in GTM, connecting it to DNS, setting up the web container for GTM, grabbing the necessary details from Facebook Business Manager, showing how to use a proxy and host or serve everything in a first-party context, going through test events, showing those events in the Facebook Business Manager, and then even showing some differences with ad blockers turned on and off. That's a lot, but we'll get through it all. And at the end, I'll touch a little bit more on how we're approaching server-side tagging, because we're really in the beginning stages for us in terms of how we're viewing this transition for an industry, and then open Q&A. And again, if we have a willing participant or someone wants to come on, and whether it's just asking questions or if you want to go through and do a screen share this time, I'm here to serve you all today. So that's the agenda. Again, I just touched on this, what you'll learn. So a couple of things that you might be wondering is how to plan for the transition and just some of the nuances of conversion API tagging for Facebook and Shopify. How is this different? Less theory, more examples, slides. Hopefully those will max out at 10 minutes, and then we're just going to jump right in to actually going through the nuts and bolts of it, and hopefully bring on a brave demo participant. A little bit about me. So I've been in e-commerce for 13 years. This is my second business in the e-commerce space. Founded Elevar about 4 years ago. I've been blessed to work with so many amazing companies, individuals, just across the entire sphere, whether it's on the brand side, the agency side, anyone in between. I love learning from everyone. We have some amazing customers and clients that we've had for many years. Again, feel very blessed to have that and work with some of you. And my passion, my personal passion is analytics. I love this stuff. I live and breathe it. And the best thing I think that we do at Elevar, and what we really are trying to strive for, is we want to make the process of getting your data foundation, which is all of your analytics and tagging and server-side tracking and Facebook conversion API, get all of that, automate as much as we can of that, so we can buy back more of your time to focus on analysis, strategy, conversion optimization. So that's our mission, is trying to automate as much of that repetitive aspect and monitoring things, so you have more time to focus on strategy to grow the business. We've made great headway over the last couple of years, and we have a long ways to go still. I have 2 boys. They are 16 months apart. One was born in February, about a month before COVID. So it was great to be able to spend so much more time with him at home, and my older one, who's about 2.5. So it's a busy household here. You might even hear a guest appearance show up here, depending on how excited he gets. And I'm based in Charleston. As a company, we are fully remote. We have team members really across the world, US, UK, etc. So that if you've worked with us, you've probably spoken to others on the team. Again, a little bit quick background on Elevar, specialized in analytics and tagging. We are an official Shopify Plus partner in the digital marketing vertical for Shopify Plus. We're also Google Cloud. Actually, it's not on here. We're also official Facebook marketing partner as well. So we've gone through different certifications with them in that process last year. And I talked through some of the benefits. And one big thing for us that we launched in 2020 is we're calling Elevar Impact Program, is honestly just trying to make an impact outside of just tagging. As fun as tagging in GTM is, trying to make an impact on children, underserved children as well. So that's something that I'm excited about and really passionate about growing this year. All right, enough of intros. Let's do it. Let's jump into it. Before I go straight into the actual demo and walkthrough, I thought it'd be fair just to do a quick rundown of just some jargon and just the general setting the context on all these different strategies and ways to implement, because it's super confusing. It changes almost by the day, it seems. So the first one is client. In the server side container for GTM, you're going to see it's a new feature called clients. If you are somewhat technical, you've probably heard the word client when referencing client side versus server side. So like the browser versus the server side. So client, again, this is just going to add more confusion. There is now a feature in GTM called clients. It is not the same as client side versus server side. So that, again, just to make your live a little bit more confusing. The second is first party versus third party context. Essentially, first party context is just think about your subdomain. So when we go through walking through the setup, when we create that subdomain, that'll be essentially, we want to try to get your data collection to first party context. Third party would be you have the Facebook script running on your site, it fires, and you Facebook, the Facebook script and everything they're doing is loading, their JavaScript's loading from facebook.com. So moving scripts like that, not just Facebook, but moving that to your first party for your subdomain can have a lot of benefits that we'll see here soon. So that's some nomenclature. I had a couple of these slides in our previous server side webinar I did. I think it was October, November last year. So you might recognize these. Basically, this is just showcasing the current world or soon to be old world, where you have all these different browser regulations. So previously ITP was a big thing. Now it's iOS 14 and everything in between, but browsers are essentially starting, or they're not starting to, they are cracking down on data collection. And then just a growth and explosion in ad blockers that are happening where they're just blocking everything. And primarily those impacts are directly felt from brands that are running data collection either through having scripts in their theme or running them through the standard GTM web container. All of those scenarios, they're all impacted, whether it's ad blockers, ITP, the impending iOS 14. And just for some numbers, so we'll publish this on a blog post at some point, but we actually went through last year and quantified for a few customers how many ad blockers or what percentage of users on their site were using ad blockers. We did that through a server-side container setup. I won't go into the nuances, but we essentially kept hitting our head against the wall. Like for whatever reason, we could not get their analytics and just some of their data collection even close to 95 to 100%. So 100% was nowhere near. We just could not. We just kept hitting our head against the wall. So we just want to start to quantify, because everyone's probably heard about ad blockers. So we said, let's just quantify this for a few sites. And it literally, there was one site, it was almost to the mark where they had 15 plus or minus 5%, depending on the day, called 15% of their traffic was using ad blockers. And we consistently see 15% delta just using the native Shopify GA setup. So just that 15%. And that was, again, we set it up across different clients, somewhere as high as 15%, but I think it really depends on your demographic that will tell you whether you have a higher percentage of ad blockers. The example I usually give is just if you're sitting in a meeting with 5, 6, 7 people, just ask like, hey, how many of you use ad blockers? Chances are at least one person is going to say yes. Expand that out across your user base, and that'll give you a sense of the percentage and the real growth that we see. What we're trying to get to with the server side process is getting to the point where your data collection is first party context. And again, we're going to go through this, so I won't spend too much time on the slide, but there's so many benefits and things that you can do that, whether it's rewriting cookies, moving a tracking domain to your own subdomain, moving all the tag logic to your server side container. So all the filtering and everything that we still do today, we do it still, but that you're doing in a web container, you can move that filtering into your server side container just to lessen the load. Again, that is a nice to have at this point. And then just the options to move all of your third party tracking to a server side container. Really the holdup now is most vendors, they don't have an advanced conversion API endpoint like Facebook does. For those that know TikTok just finally launched the ability to add custom events through GTM. Before they had that wonky setup within their own platform that you had to go through. The ultimate goal is to get to the point where you have a single data pipeline. This is our ultimate goal. Get to the point where you have a single data pipeline and you're doing the consent flag, yes or no. And then based on that consent, sending off those requests to your server-side container, and then eventually sending that data to different platforms. For example, we saw this last year with many of our customers in Europe that were everyone, again, legally had to implement the GDPR requirements. So what we'd see is you'd implement GDPR, that would essentially as opt-in only versus CCPA as opt-out. And GDPR you're essentially blocking everything, for the most part, they were just blocking everything by default. So that's impacting GA to affiliate tracking to Google AdWords, Facebook, etc. Google and others, like, well, Facebook has their LDU, Google has their consent mode, where now you can, they essentially have a process where you can implement that. If somebody opts out, you aren't cooking them or adding them to your marketing pool, but you can still essentially track the order purchase for attribution. And there, again, I could spend the whole hour going through that, but that is something that's going to evolve over 2021 and likely beyond. A few words of caution before we get started. Really trying to run through this. I'm getting out of breath talking so fast. Not a silver bullet. This solution is evolving quickly. Again, you've probably, for the customers that are around here or watching this, the replay, you've probably seen we've had so many updates come out over the last month, where not only are we adding to our own platform, but we're adapting as changes come up. So for example, Facebook had the action source parameter they wanted to add in. So that is, those are things that we're monitoring, looking for, and ultimately adding in. I'll pause for a quick question. Just, I think there are a few comments that were added. Okay, so this Facebook has an equivalent of Google's consent mode. Yeah, so maybe I'll clarify that. So Facebook has the LDU, the limited data use LDU. For those in the US, is very specific to their CCPA rollout, where you're setting that the LDU flag. That is likely to expand out in terms of the way it's set. Again, to get technical, it's basically two numbers. So it's like a state code and a country code, I believe. So I would imagine that's going to continue to evolve. It's certainly not the exact implementation of consent mode that the Google marketing platform rolled out, but it's, again, the two of the biggest platforms, they both rolled out their own, what I'm considering like their privacy fight back to be able to track, but maybe not, add to their marketing buckets. Because their goal is if Google or Facebook can't, if they're not actually receiving any order data and conversion data, then that the trickle-down effect is going to be campaigns are going to look like they're not performing as well. So CPAs are going to go up, return ad spend is going to go down, which means people likely start pulling budget. So I think that's where they're going to have to come up, or they already are coming up with solutions, but they'll continue to evolve these. Let me know if that didn't clarify, Fabian. All right, so how to send data to server-side container. There's a couple different ways. We're going to show the way that our standard setup is now. So you can use your web container, which we're going to show how to do that. There's several different ways to do that. You can hard code it in your theme through a pixel. You can proxy the G tag or the web container from your server-side container, which I'll show how to do that as well. It's really all about your server URL. So it's all about creating your own subdomain. And that's how you can just essentially send any data that you want from your site. And that, I think actually, we're going to go through that demo. The second is webhook. So you can send webhooks, so Shopify webhooks, which we're building out to essentially send data to a server-side container. But there's, again, your server-side container, in theory, you can send any data that you want to it. It doesn't necessarily just have to come from the web container or from your theme. And then the nuance there, the clients inside of a server-side container, they're essentially required to process the data. And GTM has several of those built in, so you don't have to do anything really for GA or GA4. This question we get quite often: is a data layer needed? Or even more importantly, do you need the GTM web container to run in parallel? Or if I move everything to server-side container, this is a question we get. If I move everything to the server-side container, do I also need the web container? The answer is yes. Those that are very technical might say, well, technically, no, you don't have to. 99% of the people, yes, you still need the web container and your server-side container. They run in parallel. And the data layer is needed to, if you did not have a data layer, then you're going to need to rebuild that data pipeline to get in the server-side container. The server-side container is basically, I'm terrible at analogies, so just don't beat me up too much on this, but the server-side container alone, you're just sending data to the server-side container, and the server-side container is, instead of having a tag or a pre-built tag like you're used to in the GTM web container, in the server-side container, it's different. You are sending a request to the Facebook conversion API. It's a different mechanism to send data to other API endpoints. If you aren't sending the order or the revenue and the customer ID and the order ID and everything else that goes into a transaction, if that data is not being sent to the server-side container, then it can't send. It's not going to magically pick up that data and send it to the Facebook conversion API. The way to do that, again, is still a data layer or data foundation on your site that is taking your Shopify data and making it accessible and functional for your server-side instance. And again, a little bit of theory now, we're going to show you what that means. So the short answer is, for us, yes, that's our recommendation. There's different ways to send data to the server-side container. This was, gosh, I think back in August, September, October, we were just starting to prototype different ways outside of our data layer just to send data, just using an image pixel. You can just send that straight to your server-side container. So this is simply just showing, this is just showing you can see the URL, the collect.getelevar.com with a bunch of query parameters. This is built using the measurement protocol, which in the server-side container, GTM will automatically accept this. So you basically can build out your own data collection and send this to the server-side container, and it'll basically, the server-side container will accept that and then make that available for your different quote unquote tags in the server-side container. All right, last couple slides here. We have the Facebook conversion API. So the conversion API, this lets you send standard or custom conversions to Facebook quote unquote server side. So this is outside of the browser. So you still have your pixel running, the Facebook conversion API is sending these additional events server to server. So outside the browser, this is not just purchase conversions, this is view content, add to cart, etc. The one thing that Facebook does require if you do plan on implementing the Facebook conversion API is you need to have two parameters for them to deduplicate. One is the event name, i.e. purchase or add to cart. The second is an event ID, which is it's a random generic string. It's just a random ID so Facebook can deduplicate, because and what they've told us, and probably some of you on here, they want your pixel and they want the conversion API. And the reason for that is primarily our understanding is they know the pixel, so they're having data, they've been having data loss from the pixel because of everything we mentioned before. The browser's just losing the ability to track 100% of data. So the conversion API can help fill the gap. So instead of your pixel only getting 70, 80% of, or sending only 70, 80%, the conversion API can help fill that gap. And we've been seeing that for months with customers we've had implemented on conversion API. Some have 10 to 15% of additional conversions that they're seeing in Facebook from the conversion API. This is just reiterating the pixel versus conversions. It's not an either or, it's a both. And they really want both sent, and as many, essentially if you are, the way we understand it, with your 8 conversion events that you are prioritizing, I mean, at the minimum, I would probably focus on your top 4, trying to get those top 4 sent to the conversion API. So you have the maximum, you're maximizing the data that you're sending to Facebook for this new aggregated events measurement. And this is just a visual showing that, again, website, Viori, you have your tag, your conversion API running, and both go into the same business manager account. One quick note on the privacy. So even for us as a business, we've integrated with the native Shopify privacy API. Most probably aren't using that yet. They released it with their own conversion API implementation. It's not robust enough. So we are building out other integrations with OneTrust and other common ones that you're likely using. And again, to set that consent mode flag in the data layer when those hits are being sent. Last but not least, I think it's last but not least, a couple things. So a few things that we do, you've probably seen inside your Elevar dashboard. One, we have the pre-built containers. So we have our web-based containers, and we have we're starting out the server-side containers. Right now, it's very specific to Facebook, but Pinterest has a conversion API. There's different ones for GA that you'll be seeing. So those will start to roll out in your dashboard soon. If you don't see them, some of them already. If you haven't seen them, I'll show you in a second. And then the other thing that we have today, which is live in your dashboard, is monitoring. So the monitoring that's in place right now is data layer monitoring. So if a tag fires on your site, let's say an add to cart tag, and expect that add to cart tag needs to have product ID and price and SKU or value, anything else. If those are ever undefined for any reason, that error is picked up, it's sent into your Elevar dashboard. Again, if you're a customer on here, you've probably already gotten some of the emails. By default, we set them to go out Mondays, but you can opt in to get them daily if you want. But this is what you're likely seeing inside your dashboard. So this is a great way just to automate for looking for changes, whether it's theme changes or just things break. As everyone knows, things happen to break on sites over time. So this will help automate the data layer breakage aspect of it. One point here, for those that are on our site-wide Facebook conversion API already, you probably have gotten two warnings. One is province code, one is customer email. That spiked, we saw a huge spike. They're false positives. If you haven't if you haven't read the note that we put out about that, I'm not going to get into specifics on why it's false positive, but if you have those two errors, ignore them. We've already have a fix for that, but it's a false positive. Nothing is broken per se for those two. The second part of monitoring that we are working on is success monitoring. So this is actually quantifying if you've sent 100 conversions from your server-side container to the Facebook conversion API, how many of those were successful, how many were failures. Right now, you won't potentially have the benefit of a pixel helper telling you if your conversion API events were successful. So we've already have it built out. It's just in a data studio report now, but quantifying, so now you can see how many events were sent. So basically our North Star metric is, if you had 100 purchases yesterday, how many purchases went to Facebook, how many went to AdWords, how many went to TikTok. You try to get to the point where you can just have a dashboard. You can just say, all right, we're in this magical world of everything server side. I just want to make sure that all of my order data was sent to different platforms. So that's what the success monitoring is. Deep breath, demo time. I'm going to pause here while I'm going to pause the screen share, move over to the server side container, and I just want to give everyone a chance to ask any questions while I catch my breath. So feel free to drop any questions that you have, and I will move over to our other screen share. All right. What are the extra costs setup? So the question is, what are the extra costs involved with the server side setup? It depends. What we've seen so far for those that have been on our conversion API setup, which has primarily been purchases and view content, add to cart, the cost is for high volume, some 50 plus million annual revenue, some more. The cost has been less than, $10 to $20 a month. And this is optional, as you potentially start running more traffic through your server side container. So if you are running essentially all analytics, all page view hits, everything, that cost will go up. We just have very early data. We haven't seen anything honestly more than $10, $20. So it is something you're just going to have to monitor. That's a good thing about Google Cloud, is their dashboard does a really good job of helping you predict, like just analyze or predict what the potential cost is. But for the most part, it's been extremely, extremely low. I'll show a little bit of that as well. Alrighty, so let's move over to alrighty. Can everyone see my screen? You should see a server side container. Can everybody see that? And I'll wait for someone just to give me the heads up. Another question. So what would you do for a sub business that have double fires. Facebook receives a purchase, but that is not a new purchase, it's an old customer. Denard, let me see if I can translate that question. So what would we do for someone places an order and you currently are trying to fire 2 purchase conversions that are essentially breaking up a new versus old customer? Is that right? Denard, let me. Okay, so the question for everybody is that with server-side tagging, is there a way to only fire a purchase event for new customers? So this would be their first purchase. The answer is yes. It's based on, you control that in a trigger. So in our data layer, we have there's a variable called total order count. So you could create a purchase trigger where the total order count equals 1, set that as a filter on the purchase tag, and then assign that, on the trigger, assign that to the purchase tag. So you can't do that. And there's other examples of being able to do that as well. Alrighty, so let's jump into the server-side container here. So first things first, when you if you don't have a server-side container yet, the process to create one is pretty simple. So you're going to create a new container, select server-side or server, and then that's going to spin up a new server container. At that point, you're going to you'll be in a visual. Wait for this to load. Oops, let's pause real quick. Didn't mean to go back there. Okay, so you'll have a visual. You won't have the workspace changes, but this is going to be your visual for the server-side container. At that point, what you're going to need to do is click on the server-side, your GTM ID, and then this is going to walk you through provisioning a server. I'm not going to. We have a video and a doc that goes through this, so I'm not going to waste everyone's time by having you wait for a spinner to load here. Once this is done loading, then you're going to have, you'll actually have a Google Cloud app instance. So inside of Google Cloud, again, most of you will never have to spend time in here. Really, the only time that you'll spend in here is to create your custom subdomain. But inside of App Engine settings, again, we have a full documentation video. If you have not done this yet, you'll spend time here creating your custom subdomain. So the subdomain here, you need to tell Google, let Google know that you own the domain, your primary domain. So in our case, that's getelevar.com. So that's by having a verified user on your Google Search Console. So make sure when you are doing this that the user that you created your Google Tag Manager account with, that you are also the verified user in Google Search Console. At that point, you go through and create your custom subdomain. It's going to give you 8 DNS entries. This catches people all the time. It's the way that Google spins up in the DNS record is super confusing, because by default, they're going to show you the www version of your site and walk you through adding those A records and quad A records. And again, in the help doc, it shows you to delete those. So you actually have to delete those. And this is essentially what your DNS entry will look like. Most of you probably don't have Cloudflare, but when you are going through and creating the DNS entries, you only use, so in our case, this is using eCollect. You only have to use your subdomain that you created, set those in your DNS records. So the host name is eCollect, and the IP address is what Google provides. That never change anything related to your www or your @ so never change any of that. That's what this should look like. At that point, when that's done, sometimes it'll take an hour or so for that to register, and now you have a subdomain that is connected to your server-side container. The way to verify that it works is all you have to do is just simply click preview. And the preview mode will open. And if this loads in a new window and your subdomain loads like this, like you see here, then your DNS creation worked as expected. So for me, I can see this works as expected. At that point, we can move on to the container. So inside your server-side container, you won't have these workspace changes. So I've gone ahead and just prepped this ahead of time so you don't have to watch me download and import. Inside your Elevar dashboard, you can just search for Facebook and you'll see this server-side container here. So this server-side container is going to change. It's going to evolve over the next few months. This is pretty much exactly what you are looking at inside the server-side container that I just showed you. So download this, import it into your server-side container, and then you'll have something that looks like this. These custom clients, we're in a little bit of a transition the way that we're handling purchases. So you might have, depending on when you're watching the replay of this, you might have both of these. So we split up purchases and the other site-wide events, or you might just have the Facebook events where it's in our knowledge base now, but you can run everything through the web container proxy. That's what this would look like. So the next step here is going to be configuring your token, your Facebook pixel ID, and your test event code. So the Facebook token is really simple to get. In your Facebook Business Manager, when you go to settings, simply scroll down, create access token. There's a couple of prompts that'll walk you through, and just copy that token ID and go back into your server-side container and just copy it into copy that token into here. If the reason why I left these up here like this, so if you are ever updating templates based on upgrades that we release, we always recommend after you've gone through and updated your token, and by the way, this token it's going to be deleted. So I'm not too worried. Normally you don't want to show your token to anybody, but this one everything's going to be reset. So I'm not doing this as a test Facebook Business Manager, but always remove that update after import, because what will happen is when you re-import any new container that we provide, we are going to append this update after import. So if you do that and you import a new one, then go back to your clients and just make sure that these variables here, they're pointing to the variables that actually contain your pixel ID and your token. So just a quick reference on that. It's a little bit of a nuance there. Obviously your pixel ID, you know how to grab that. And then the test event code. So the test event code you can actually get here. So this is looking at our Facebook Business Manager, and you get a couple of these Zoom windows out of the way. So what you'll likely see is something like this, where you have a test event code. Just grab this, copy it into your server-side workspace, and that's it. Now it's time to move on to the web container. So at that point, server-side container for all intents and purposes, it's pretty much done. Yeah, for Facebook Conversion API, it's pretty much done. It's not published yet. Now we'll move on to our server-side container. So the server-side container, if you have not downloaded and imported one of our containers previously, or let's say the last time you've done this was December, we do have new containers. You will be able to check the date that they were last updated. So the Facebook Pixel and Conversion API events. So this you can just see what this contains. So this contains just the Facebook tags, triggers, and variables, and the templates that we're using to send data to the server-side container. You can always check the last updated date here. And we also have, there's a change log in our knowledge base that'll show all the different changes that we've rolled out over time, and then go through our full install guide here. Once you download this, or if you are starting, let's say you're starting from scratch, you can also download the full containers. So this plus container, it already contains all of the Facebook tags that you need for the Facebook Conversion API. So you can download this or the Facebook container and then import into your web container. Once this is imported, for this, just to save time, I'm just going to focus on Facebook here. I'm not going to touch on all of the other tags in here. That'll be on a future one, which will probably be a week or two. I'll go through Google Analytics and Google AdWords and a couple others. So we'll just focus on Facebook. You'll see 8 or 9 tags here. These are the base pixel tags that you are likely used to. Let's take a look at product view, and then we'll look at the purchase. So what I mentioned, running the pixel and conversion API in parallel, what was one of the requirements that we had to do to deduplicate? What did Facebook need us to send? If you're entering in your head, it's event ID. It's that unique event ID. So Facebook needs the event name and a unique event ID sent with the pixel and with your purchase. And the event ID, so if we're sending a view content through the pixel and we're sending it through the conversion API, they both need to have the unique event ID, so Facebook can essentially deduplicate. So that you'll see in every single one of these tags. You're going to see that in these are just your pixel events. These are actually, you'll see the event ID is unique. So if you don't have this, if you have an older container from us or someone else, and you're trying to launch conversion API, this needs to be there. If you don't have this there, then you'll end up sending duplicate data if you have the Facebook conversion API implemented in parallel. So that's number one. A couple things that you'll need to think about here is if you've used the native Shopify Facebook pixel setup historically, that uses product group and the product ID as essentially your primary content parameters. That's what we've set up to. That's our default. So if you have customized yours where you need variant ID or product as a content type, you'll have to change that in the setup here. So just be aware of those nuances as well. To address now let's go on to purchases. So to address one of the questions in the beginning around what's the maximum setting in the native Shopify Facebook conversion API, that's for purchases. So when you enable the maximum data or essentially that's called maximum something, but the maximum setting, that is essentially enabling the Facebook conversion API for your purchases, and you'll see the advanced matching data, which theirs is pretty similar to what we're using. So this is some of the customer data on a purchase, email, phone number, first name, last name, etc. That would be the example of the advanced matching data that's being enabled by default in the native Shopify setup, and this is in the GTM world. So inside, I need to take a sip here one moment. So inside the pixel for purchase, you'll see we have a few different parameters here. We have a customer type. So we've had this for AdWords and Facebook for quite a while, so you might have already seen this. There's a couple that are new for the conversion API. One is external ID. That's essentially a customer ID. This customer type is just a yes or no, that binary. Bernard, I think that was one of your questions. So we actually send this as a parameter that can potentially be used. And then just your standard purchase, so your value, contents, etc. And then you'll see the event ID at the bottom here, where we are using the checkout ID or order ID for this. So this is what the Facebook purchase pixel looks like. The server event. Now this is using a custom template written by us at Elevar. So this would be a template. I'll just show you quickly here. Inside of templates, this it is not in the template gallery yet, like our monitoring ones are. It will be, but you don't really have to do anything. Once it comes with the import automatically, and this is what essentially is doing a bunch of the logic for us to send this data to the server-side container. So if you don't have the server-side events, then make sure you download from your dashboard and import it. A couple things that you'll need to configure here: your server-side endpoint. So that's that URL. You'll recognize the eCollect. This is that test event code that we saw from here. So just copied that. So that's the test event code. And then there's a few options here. So we have the currency code. This is that event ID. Again, this is what we use by default. If you have your own integration, you can change that out. And then you have the options for changing out your product ID. So whether if you're using variant, you can change that here, and then enabling the events. So two things to consider here. By default, you're going to see view content, add to cart, initiate checkout. Right now, if you're download today, enabled by default. You can enable purchase. We do one thing here that you'd have to modify if you ever want to customize this. This is a custom trigger that maps to our data layer events, which I'll show here in a couple minutes. And this is essentially controlling when this tag fires, and you'll see the add to cart, product view, begin checkout, purchase. So this needs to match the events that you want to enable here. Since we have these disabled by default, we don't want this tag to trigger unnecessarily. So we need to update that, and that's in our docs as well. So this is the Facebook conversion API for the non-purchase and the purchase events. And for those that are on here that have either implemented our purchase back in Q4 or have gone through our recent challenge, you've implemented essentially that hard-coded thank you page pixel. We still have that. That's still in our help docs. You can do that. This is an option. So in that, the help docs on the knowledge base, we actually show 2 options to implement the purchase event. This will likely become the default using the web container. However, we are basically beta prototyping the GTM proxy, which I'll show you here in a second. But just want to clarify, you will see 2 different approaches for purchases. They both work essentially the same if you follow the guides for both of them, but just wanted to call that out. If anybody has any questions on that as you're going through it, you can let us know. And that's it. So once this is done, you are essentially, your Facebook web container is ready to go. The last but not least is going to be on the data layer. So either, again, if you are an existing customer that has already implemented our data layer and it's installed in your store, then you should be good to go if you have installed this really this year, since January. We have rolled out several updates, so you just want to double check the version that you're on, or just go through the upgrade process. And again, that's all in our change log. This will walk you through the step-by-step setup of the data layer. So the events, these are just your standard GTM events, where we'll just go through and I'll do a quick preview showing how that works. And hopefully I don't get any demo fail errors here. So I'm just going to go through to a product page, and then we'll add to cart. And we'll hold off at the cart page. All right. So the data layer that you see here, so this is obviously, it's already installed on my store. You're going to see all these different events as we're going through. So we have the view item list, which is the collection page, and you'll see the data layer that's populated here. And you'll notice that the event ID, this is that unique identifier. So as I go through the different pages here, let's just go back to our product page. So as I go through our different pages here, you'll see the view item. Again, this event ID is changing, and this is ultimately going to change as you progress through the site. But this is the data layer. This is the default data layer that if you already have installed, this is live in your store. I won't go through much detail on that, but this is essentially what these events are mapped to, are those different events throughout the site. Then you have your container ID, and then the GTM proxy. This is getting into advanced world. I'm going to come back to the GTM proxy here in a second to show how that works, but this is configured. I wouldn't configure this right away unless you're very technical and you know essentially how to monitor. So I'll come back to that. At this point, I'm going to save the configuration, and then you can just walk through step by step of removing old GTM code. If you're a non-plus store, copy this in your thank you page. If you're a plus store, you don't need to do this step. It's automatically injected into your checkout.liquid template. Go through the process of importing the containers that we just walked through. And then the last step here is installing or reinstalling. So this is the step that actually installs the Elevar snippets into your production theme that ultimately generates that data layer that we just looked at. This is done already. So at this point, data layer is live on my store. I have my server-side container. I have my web container. I'm going to put them both in a preview mode. So we'll put our server-side container in the preview mode here. And our web container is already in preview mode. And let's just go through and browse the site. And we'll check our Facebook Business Manager and see if we start to see some conversion API events go through. So at this point, I've triggered the view content and an add to cart. And in our server-side container, this is the preview mode, which if you aren't familiar with this, don't worry, because this might look like, I don't even know how to explain what this would look like, but essentially this is the log of your server-side container that's showing, hey, we had an inbound request from store.getelevar.com. This is essentially what contained the server-side or all the event data that we need for the conversion API. You can see our client, that custom client here, claimed the request. So it was claimed. And then the outgoing request. So this is actually the conversion API event that went out to Facebook. And you can see that it was claimed. and it was successful. If it was an error, then you would get a 400 or 500 response, and you get an error code down here. So at this point, I'm expecting to see a couple test events, which demo worked this time. For those that were on one I did a couple months ago, I had a demo fail because I was messing around with the containers before. So this is what you should expect to see as you go through this process. We have our page view event, which is just a pixel. So there's just a browser. We have the view content. So this is showing, essentially showing one view content event where we have a pixel and a server event. So you can see the browser and server event that are both have gone through. They both have the same event ID here. And Facebook is deduplicating. So they're basically discarding the conversion API event because they have the pixel event, and they prefer, and this is what they have in their docs, they prefer the pixel event when they have both, and they'll just discard the server. So you can see as we've gone through the add to cart and a purchase, and you can actually click into these and see the different data that's associated with this. So this is perfect. To me, if I were going through and doing QA, I'd go through and place a purchase, which we can do that here in a second. But this is what I would expect to see. We have the pixel and the conversion API event, and everything is being deduplicated properly. I'm going to pause there just to see if we have any questions. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay. Let's fast forward. Okay, so question, how can you send a test purchase? Okay, a couple questions coming in, feel free to, how can we send a test purchase? Can we go through and place a test purchase? So using the same, second question is, so you're using the same ID on your browser pixel GTM container. Marco, you're referring to the pixel ID? Oh, the event ID, okay. Yeah, good question. Good clarifying question. Let's go back and look at the server side container here, and let's look at the web container. The event ID, if we go back here to our add to cart, this event and event ID, we're physically setting this event ID in the web container that we are looking at here. So this event ID here, this is the same. So if you set it here, this is what the conversion API event ID is going to use. This is just a variable. So this is a variable. We go, yeah. So okay, so that same one needs to exist in both. Yes, exactly. That event ID, it's built into our data layer. It's automatically done. You don't need really, if you were just importing our templates, you don't need to change anything. That's automatically set by default on the server side template and on the browser. So this is the same exact variable. It's reading something from the same variable. Let's just look at the variable here in the web container event. So this is our user defined variables, and you'll see the event ID is set up here. We are going to change this to be monitored, so you'll get alerted when if this is ever empty. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. It needs to be the same ID set in both the server side template and the Facebook pixel. Let's just run through and finish up with a test order. We'll go through the checkout process. And this is a non-plus store, so we won't see the initiate checkout event here in checkout. For non-plus stores, currently what we're doing is recommending that you trigger the initiate checkout when someone clicks to proceed to checkout, or if you drive people through your cart page, then you can trigger it there, which is what we'd set up by default. So there are ways to still do the initiate checkout for non-plus stores. All right, so let's just complete our order here. And while that's loading, Cedric has a question. When I try to preview the server side in GTM, I get a 404 error. Does that mean it's not set up properly in Google Cloud? Yes, that means your DNS is not set up properly. I'll go back to the DNS settings here so you can see that again. Alrighty, so I placed an order, and let's check this is the web container, so we can see the purchase was executed. We can see all of our various data here from the order. Now let's go to the server side container, and we'll look for the purchase event. So we can see this also was claimed. Now let's go to our Facebook Business Manager and look for a purchase. So we can see our purchase was processed and deduplicated. And by the way, you're actually seeing this in real time. Sometimes what we'll actually see here, so this event ID was different, even though they're using, I'm wondering if I'm gonna have the different variable set up. So this is actually a good use case. So if you see these split up like this, where you have a purchase event that is essentially back to back, and the IDs are different, that is a signal that the event ID is not matching up. So this one, which is odd about this one, is the event ID is 685A, and okay, so this is actually a good use case. So the event ID here, this is different. So I didn't change the event ID for the purchase to match the event ID for the server side. So let's go back and check this. So this is actually why this actual purchase event right here. And let's pull this one up. Go back to our server side events. So this purchase event here, again, you'll see in our knowledge base, we have two different breakups. We have the copy and paste thank you script, which everyone probably has that today. You're going to see that thank you page uses the order ID, which is technically a checkout ID. This purchase event here uses the event ID that we saw in the data layer. So probably hopefully not confusing too much, but the event ID that we have set here, this is enabled for the purchase. The copy and paste script and the thank you page that we've had previously, that is using order ID as the unique event ID. That's why we go through and test and validate this, because this is essentially showing that looks like Facebook did deduplicate it somehow. They did dedupe it, but that's where the different order IDs are coming in from the copy and paste order ID versus the purchase event ID. So that was a good use case to walk through. All right, so before I move on to the GTM proxy example, any questions that anyone has here so far? Alrighty, so let's go through the GTM proxy example. And while I'm doing that, if anyone is interested in coming on to do a screen share to walk through your setup, or if you just want to pop and ask questions, feel free to get ready, and I can bring you on here live in a second. All right, so let's take a look at our server side container here, and let's go to our clients. So there's a new client that GTM rolled out, which is called the Google Web Tag Manager Web Container Proxy. And essentially what this allows you to do is, normally if you just go to any site, if you go to your own site, view your source code, you're going to see googletagmanager.com /js or /gtm.js. Essentially what this feature allows you to do is this. If we go back to that viewer example where I was showing, you can have GTM loaded from your own domain, your own subdomain. This allows your web container to load from your own subdomain. There's two things you have to do here to get this set up. One, enter your web container that you have set up here. Oops. So this is my web container GTM ID. Too many Zoom windows here. So this is my GTM web container ID. You drop this into the allowed container IDs, and then you click save or submit if you publish it. And then inside your Elevar dashboard, you enter your subdomain here. So this is your GTM proxy URL. So this is essentially changing your Google Tag Manager JavaScript instead of loading from googletagmanager.com, it's loading from ecollect.getelevar.com. And you can actually see this in action if you just go to your site and view source code, view your page source. And you'll see it's probably pretty small, but you can see this Google Tag Manager script, we've replaced this to now load from your subdomain. So at this point, GTM for this test store is loading from, is essentially being proxied from my first party domains. So for my server-side container. The primary benefit from this is all of your data collection moves in first party context. So some want to do that because they want to get around ad blockers. Some want to do that because they have different advanced mechanisms that they're doing with data privacy or cleanliness inside a server-side container. There's a few examples, but obviously the big one here is this moves you from a third-party context for some of your scripts loading to a first-party context. What does that mean? Let's take a look here. So if you aren't familiar with Ghostery, so let's resume Ghostery, which is an ad blocker, and let's reload the site. And let's just do an example here looking at our Facebook pixel helper. So we'll load this. So the question, ad blockers won't just block GTM.js no matter the domain it loads from. They're very, very different. So if let's just load this up in a incognito window. And actually, I need to publish. So give me 1 second. Let me just publish these real quick. And I'll just Ketan, if that, hopefully I pronounced your name okay. I'll show you here in a second how that works. So let me just submit the, we can look at this in incognito. By the way, realize others can't see the question. So the question was, ad blockers won't just block GTM.js no matter the domain it loads from. So do ad blockers block if it's loading from your subdomain versus googletagmanager.com? In our experience, for the most part, right now they aren't blocking from a subdomain. It does differ a bit, but for the most part, we're seeing that it doesn't block. So I have our store.getelevar.com. We have Ghostery enabled here, and we can see our Facebook pixel is still firing. What's interesting here is if you have, this is a real site, and let's say you have Criteo and Bing and others through your web container, you'll see all of those are blocked, but Facebook, since Facebook is loading, essentially being proxied through our subdomain, this actually is continuing to go through. So we can see through the funnel here that it's loading. And let's go back and make the change. And I'm just going to remove this, save configuration. We're going to reinstall. So we'll update this. We'll go back to the googletagmanager.com. And let me just confirm that our source is back to googletagmanager.com. And you can see now Facebook is being blocked as we go through the site. So this is where it gets into either obviously legal, privacy, subjective. Those that just prefer to just let the user kind of make up their own decision. I'm just simply we're here showing you the possibilities, and it's up to you to decide whether this is something that makes sense for you and your business. A caveat like this, it doesn't get around legal compliance. So if you do have CCPA needs or GDPR or anything that falls in between, obviously I can tell you what to do, but we, at least for our customers, we advise that get that in place. And we had our CCPA implementation up last July that can be added to Facebook and Google Ads and others. Implement that as needed and just follow the guidance. But this is example of what a GTM proxy, which essentially is loading your Google Tag Manager from your server-side container, can do. And obviously, if you do have a high percentage of ad blocker users on your site, you're going to see an increase in data collection. Getting back to a question earlier about the cost in Google Cloud, this is where your cost will go up because you are essentially serving more requests. Your server-side container is handling more requests coming in now that we're proxying GTM coming from ecollect.getelevar.com. It's being proxied from our server-side container. So that's where the costs go up. when you first initialize your server-side container in a Google Cloud, when they spin up the App Engine instance, it's a test instance. It is not a production-ready instance. So depending on how much traffic you have, it could get to the point where that test instance will start to lag, where the request will slow down, which inherently would just delay GTM from loading and delay potential data collection. So very, very much a word of caution. We do, Thomas, our who oversees all our engineering and product, he has an article that we'll be publishing on our knowledge base that essentially goes through some load testing scenarios of the test container versus a production instance, and where you might want to think about it makes sense to upgrade your container inside Google Cloud. But that's getting very, very technical. So that is a word of caution of, if you are turning on the GTM proxy, then be sure you can monitor. So keep that in mind. That is all that I had planned to show. So just to do a quick recap, we created our server-side container. We connected it to Google Cloud. We connected the DNS. So we walked through connecting a subdomain to our Google Cloud instance. In order to verify that it works, click preview. If you have 404s, that means the DNS is not set up. The other thing that usually tricks many is, after you create your subdomain, is you need to also set the URL here in your tagging server URL. So we need to set that up. We looked at what does your DNS entry look like for the server-side container. So that's what we looked at here. And then we went through our web container, looked at the base Facebook of our Facebook events, where they're magically gone from here. Let me reload. Go to, so this contained in our pre-built containers. So inside your Elevar dashboard, we had the pre-built containers under 2.0, either the full containers or a couple of Facebook conversion API containers that you can download here. These you import into your web container, go through your settings, go through, again, there's that article that we linked to here, which is the full install guide. When I was referencing the copy paste script versus the purchase option, which we mentioned down here. Nope, that's the wrong one. Let me just show you. Okay, so here's the server-side guide. So step 3, to implement purchase conversion API tracking. So this is where we have the download script that I was referencing. So that's what you're looking at here. So this isn't for the thank you page. And then we have the implement via web container, which is the option here. And this is where I even slipped up in just running through and testing this, where the event ID was different in my server-side container versus the browser container. So that's why I go through and use a test code to check that. And yeah, I went through the process of validating inside your Facebook Business Manager. So looking at how the events are flowing through and being deduplicated. And then last but not least, we looked at the GTM proxy and how that works, and doing a little ad blocker before and after test. All right, so now does anyone have any questions? Does anyone want to come on? I'm here for you all if y'all need any help or need to answer, have any questions that you want answered. There's no bad questions. I know I was running through everything pretty quickly if this is fairly new to you. All right, I'm not seeing any questions or volunteers to come on, so I'll wait another 30 seconds. Appreciate it. Got a couple thank yous. So if existing customers, if you're getting set up and running any issues, just contact us through help@getelevar.com. If you are new to Elevar, you can visit our site, getelevar.com, where you probably signed up for this, and you can look at different plans we have available. So I appreciate, okay, one question, couple questions coming in. All right, so does the Facebook conversion API 1 challenge cover this? Yeah, so we have that challenge. The challenge is a 5-day server-side challenge. There's videos that I'm going through probably a little bit slower than this, a little bit more bite size. So that does go through setting up the conversion API for that. Otherwise, if you can sign up for any of the plans really, and you'll inside your Elevar dashboard. Let me just go back to our dashboard here. There's a list of to-dos that can walk you through that process. The challenge, we have the Facebook group. So if you have any questions, you can ask us or ask. I usually am jumping in and helping out with that. So inside your Elevar dashboard, you're going to see some to-dos here to go through the process of getting everything configured. Can we move to the GTM proxy with existing Elevar setup without changing other tags? Yeah, that's a good question. So you can enable the GTM proxy. You don't need to change any of your tags. Again, it's just like anything. It's an advanced feature. It's a beta feature. It's still new, fairly new to us. We're starting to quantify, like load testing it. So just proceed with caution on that. But if you do enable that, you do not need to change any of your tags in the web container.